Welcome to U.S. Media Power.
Tonight we bring you a major international development that could shape the course of the nearly 4-year-long war in Ukraine, a conflict that continues to impact global geopolitics, energy markets, military alliances, and the lives of millions of civilians. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy is preparing to meet with former U.S. President Donald Trump in Florida this weekend, where he will press for strong security guarantees as part of ongoing peace negotiations. This meeting, scheduled for Sunday, comes amid some of the most intense Russian military strikes in months, including a massive assault on the Ukrainian capital of Kyiv that killed civilians and crippled vital infrastructure just hours before Zelenskyy's departure. AP News in tonight's report, we will take you inside the context of this high-stakes diplomatic effort. What's on the table? What's at stake for Ukraine, how Moscow is reacting, and why world leaders and international partners are watching closely. Before diving into the Florida talks, it is crucial to understand the backdrop against which these discussions are unfolding: the brutal reality of the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Despite ongoing diplomatic efforts, the war that began with Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 2022 has continued with devastating human cost and widespread destruction. In the days leading up to Zelenskyy's departure, Russian forces launched a significant aerial and drone assault on Kyiv and other cities, using long-range missiles, hypersonic weapons, and swarms of unmanned drones. Officials reported that at least one person was killed and dozens were wounded as the barrage hit residential areas, energy infrastructure, and transportation routes, leaving parts of Ukraine's capital with outages in heat and electricity particularly perilous as winter deepens. It was one of the largest coordinated strikes in recent months, a stark reminder that diplomatic talks are happening not in a vacuum, but amid active conflict and ongoing violence. Ukrainian authorities condemned the attack as proof that Moscow is attempting to undermine peace efforts and leverage military pressure as talks continue. With this volatile situation unfolding, President Zelenskyy departed Kyiv for Florida, where he will meet with Donald Trump. Zelenskyy stated that his primary goal is to secure firm and credible security guarantees for Ukraine, assurances that would help protect the country against further aggression if a ceasefire or peace framework is agreed. This meeting is part of a larger peace effort involving the United States, European partners, and Ukrainian negotiators, aimed at ending the war that has now lasted close to 4 years. A revised 20-point peace proposal is reportedly nearing completion and is expected to be central to these discussions, outlining not only security guarantees but also economic rebuilding and territorial considerations. Zelenskyy emphasized that these guarantees are critical for Ukraine's future stability, sovereignty, and ability to rebuild after years of war. The term security guarantees refers to binding commitments from other countries that Ukraine would receive support if its sovereignty is threatened again in the future. Unlike membership in a formal military alliance like NATO, which Ukraine still aspires to, security guarantees can take different forms: formal bilateral or multilateral agreements pledging military or economic support, deployment of international monitoring forces on Ukrainian territory, long-term defense cooperation frameworks with the U.S. and European allies, specific commitments to respond to future aggression with sanctions or military aid. Zelenskyy has stressed that these guarantees are more important than ever, especially given continued Russian attacks on civilian infrastructure amid peace talks. For Ukraine, formalized guarantees would serve as an insurance policy, a sign that the international community is not simply negotiating peace for today, but protecting security for years to come. According to reports, discussions between Zelenskyy and Trump will focus on several highly sensitive issues: security guarantees for Ukraine, territorial control in disputed regions such as Donetsk and Zaporizhia, economic reconstruction support, the status of Ukraine's nuclear plant in Zaporizhia, terms related to future ceasefires or peace frameworks. These are not easy topics. On territorial matters, Ukraine insists it will not recognize annexation or permanent Russian control over areas taken since the invasion began, a stance at odds with Moscow's goals. Reuters, meanwhile, the Zaporizhia nuclear plant, Europe's largest, remains a significant concern for safety and security, as both sides vie for leverage involving this strategic site. Economic rebuilding is also a major subject. Ukraine will require tens of billions of dollars to reconstruct towns, cities, infrastructure, and industry damaged or destroyed during the conflict. Trump's role in these discussions adds a unique dynamic. as he brings a different diplomatic approach from previous U.S. administrations, requiring careful navigation of allied interests, domestic U.S. politics, and global expectations. Former President Donald Trump, though no longer the sitting U.S. president, holds significant political influence and remains a central figure in U.S.-Ukraine diplomacy. Trump has previously spoken about the need for strong security arrangements, but also emphasized that no agreement is final without his approval, suggesting a cautious negotiation stance. Trump's involvement reflects a broader U.S. strategic interest in shaping the terms of peace, particularly in terms of security architecture and future military cooperation. At the same time, FORMER U.S. leadership and Trump as advisors have engaged in talks with both Ukrainian and Russian envoys in Florida and elsewhere, underscoring the complex diplomacy underway. It is also important to note that opinions within the U.S. political establishment about how to engage vary widely, from robust support for Ukrainian defense at any cost to advocates for negotiated compromises that could reduce American commitments. This political diversity sets the stage for a high-stakes negotiation where every word, promise, and concession matters. While diplomacy proceeds, Russia's military operations continue unabated. The recent strikes on Kyiv were among the most significant in months, involving drones, ballistic missiles, and hypersonic weapons. According to Ukrainian authorities, Russian defense sources described the attacks as part of broader military objectives, but Ukrainian leaders saw them as a deliberate effort to disrupt peace momentum and demonstrate Moscow's ability to inflict substantial damage. Russian President Vladimir Putin has so far shown little indication of accepting peace terms that do not align with Moscow's strategic priorities, particularly regarding territorial control in the Donbass and other regions. This continued aggression raises fundamental questions about whether military pressure or diplomatic negotiation will ultimately determine the war's outcome. Beyond the United States and Ukraine, European nations and other global partners are deeply invested in the peace process. In the days preceding Zelensky's departure, he communicated with European leaders including Canada's Prime Minister and representatives from the EU on coordinating positions ahead of the Florida talks. The European Union has pledged billions in aid and economic support, while NATO countries have bolstered Ukraine's defensive capabilities. Yet European allies also face their own internal political pressures and diverging views on how firmly to anchor Ukraine within Western security frameworks. Allied cooperation is essential, because a negotiated peace, if achieved, will need the backing of a broad coalition, not just a U.S.-Ukraine bilateral agreement. It's important to remember that behind every diplomatic maneuver are millions of civilians, families, workers, children, and communities living with the immediate consequences of war. In cities like Kyiv, Kharkiv, and Zaporizhia, civilians continue to endure power outages, disrupted water systems, damaged homes, and fear of ongoing attacks. For soldiers on the front lines on both sides, the price of war is physical, psychological, and familial. These human realities inform Ukraine's insistence on security guarantees, because without assurances of future safety, peace remains fragile. Recent reporting indicates that Ukrainian and U.S. negotiators have worked to refine a 20-point peace framework, down from an earlier 28-point draft that was heavily criticized. This draft plan aims to balance Ukrainian sovereignty and territorial integrity, security assurances backed by allies' economic reconstruction and investment, neutral zones or demilitarized regions. Yet two key sticking points remain: the status of contested regions like Donetsk and Luhansk, the control and future security of the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant, Le Monde.fr. The fact that talks have continued despite these impasses suggests that both sides recognize the urgency of formalizing a path to peace. What does success look like at the end of these talks? For Ukraine, strong, enforceable security guarantees, recognition of sovereign borders, path to economic recovery, support from the international community. For the United States, a stable Europe free of large-scale conflict, a mechanism that ensures long-term regional security, continued leadership, and diplomatic conflict resolution. For global partners, a reduction in refugee flows, stabilization of global energy markets, a precedent for diplomatic peace even amid warfare. None of these outcomes is simple or guaranteed, but they represent the aspirations behind this high-profile meeting. As President Zelenskyy heads to Florida to meet President Trump this Sunday, the world watches closely. The stakes could not be higher: a war that has reshaped European security, Tens of thousands of lives lost, cities devastated, and millions displaced. Yet amid this grim reality, diplomacy continues, and leaders are still working toward a framework that may one day be remembered as a turning point. Whether security guarantees can be secured, whether territorial disputes can be resolved, and whether peace can truly take hold remains to be seen. What is certain is this: the coming days will be pivotal, not just for Ukraine and the United States, but for global stability and the future of international alliances. For U.S. Media Power, I'm your host. Stay informed, stay updated, and thank you for watching.